Welcome back to Tales from the Jar Side. This is the video series where, if you don't feel like reading my newsletter, I'll be happy to read it to you. So here's the newsletter for this week, the week of January 8th through 15th, 2023. The title includes Mockito 5's release, a little bit about PragProgWriMo, which I'll have to explain, and then some experiments with Stable Diffusion and the so-called Uncanny Valley, Twitter being evil again, part 1000 plus or whatever, and a few other clever posts. The subtitle, as you can see, is Shakespeare saying to be or not to be, and Schrodinger replying, see, this guy gets it. Oh, I forgot my instant rim shot here. There we go. So, welcome, fellow jarheads, to Tales from the Jar Side, the Cousin IT newsletter for the week of January 8th through 15th, 2023. I taught my regular Getting Started with Spring and Spring Boot course on the O'Reilly Learning Platform this week in the APAC time zones, which was interesting. That's Asia Pacific. And completed another couple of Medium posts on Mockito for the pipeline. We're getting those ready for when the book is formally released, and then we'll have a series of Medium posts in the Pragmatic Programmer's publication on Medium. Regular readers of and listeners to, and now, of course, viewers of this newsletter are affectionately known as jarheads and are far more intelligent, sophisticated, and attractive than the average newsletter reader or listener or viewer. If you wish to become a jarhead, then you can subscribe here. Of course, I would love it if you would like or comment or subscribe on the video series as well. That would be great. Okay, starting with Mockito. This is a bit of a story, as usual, so I'll just give it the way it's shown here. Mockito 5 was finally released. I'll mention here that I've been working on my upcoming book on the Mockito testing framework for over a year now. Now here's Mockito. I've got the link here. Mockito is at mockito.org. Whoops, isn't that interesting? Huh. Doesn't want to go there. Figures it would be down just as I try to go there. Okay, I took off the HTTPS and now it's working. So at any rate, there's Mockito. It redirected to site.mockito.org. I probably made the mistake of putting in the full URL manually rather than just copying and pasting. That's probably what happened on that. But at any rate, there's the mocks testing, the framework, the Java testing framework for creating mocks, stubs, and spies. Right here, it's the open source framework. And here, by the way, at PragProg.com is my upcoming book, which is called Mockito Made Clear, Java unit testing with mocks, stubs, and spies. Okay, so I've been working on this book for over a year now. Some of the delays are my own bad estimation capabilities, which is pretty typical of software developers and many others everywhere. But there's a bit of a story as to why this book was written in the first place, and it has to do with this thing called PragProgWriMo and other unreasonable goals. In October of 2021, one editor for the Pragmatic Programmers, Margaret Eldridge, published a post on Medium mentioning two interesting facts. One is that Pragmatic Programmers has this special series called Pragmatic Answers, designed for books that are short and sweet. They're only about 50 pages in length, and they are ebook only, so there's no physical copy. So the idea is that they'll be quick to produce, quick to consume, and can focus on smaller topics that may not warrant a full book treatment. They're also correspondingly less expensive, too. Like at most, they're about $10 US for the book. The other thing she pointed out in that post was that November, which is when it was written, she wrote in October of 2021, said November is National Novel Writing Month, which is often abbreviated NaNoWriMo. That's a project where a lot of people participate, and the goal is to generate an entire 50,000 word of fiction, maybe a novel, in a month. You spend the month cranking away, and for those people who have difficulty getting started, would like more of a communal effort for that sort of writing project, then it's just an interesting way to get going. As they say, it's designed as a way to get the new project started, though some people actually do finish an entire novel in that time. This is what it looks like. There's the NaNoWriMo website, and you could sign up and you'll post in, your progress and what have you, if you're interested. So Margaret suggested that technical writers might want to consider putting together a pragmatic answers book for their project. So therefore it was called PragProgWriMo for the pragmatic programmers. So clever. I like the idea, or I did at the time. I had just finished back-to-back books, my Modern Java Recipes book, for O'Reilly, Kotlin Cookbook, which was also O'Reilly, and then Help Your Boss Help You, which was for pragmatic programmers. But the appeal of spending only a month cranking out a short book was undeniable, especially because I already had a book in mind. For the last few years, I've been teaching a training class on Mockito, on the Mockito testing framework, and that class was always made more difficult by the fact that a lot of the students didn't really understand what mock stubs and spies were all about. The Mockito documentation focuses on showing you how to use Mockito, so it doesn't really go into those fundamental issues, kind of assumes you know that. And I thought a simple primer on a subject like Mockito on how and why to use it in the first place would be welcome. At the time, I also had a bit of a gap in my schedule, so I thought that might work. I thought if my schedule is very thin in December, and it often is a little thin in January, then I reasoned if I started in November, I ought to be finished a 50-page book by January, right? That ought to be nothing. And of course, I have to put in the comment, I can almost hear you saying, "Oh, my sweet summer child." Honestly, I have no defense. I really did think it was going to be very quick. I was just going to translate what I said during the class into book form. Besides, the rumor had it that my hero/nemesis, who I've talked about many times here, Venkat Subramaniam, was also planning a new book in the Pragmatic Answers series, because of course he was. He'd done everything else. He had more books to his name than anybody, and I thought, okay, well, let's follow that. Sounds like a good idea. So I proposed the Mockito book, and Margaret agreed to edit it. Went through the process and everything. Naturally enough, as soon as I agreed, then a consulting project came in that grabbed a bunch of my time. It was going to require half-time or more, and of course the half-time never worked. It was always or more. Commitment for the next few months, in addition to my regular teaching schedule, and also I learned yet again that just because I've taught something a few dozen times doesn't mean that I can just translate that knowledge to text without it growing and changing in fundamental ways, just like happened with my Managing Your Manager book, which turned into Help Your Boss Help You. I initially proposed the book to be called Understanding Mockito, but that seemed kind of bland, and we later changed the title to Mockito Made Clear, which still feels a little odd to me, but hopefully it works for you. You let me know. Feel free to let me know what you think. So long story short, yep, too late, I know. Most of the book got written last spring and summer rather than over that time period I thought I was going to use to write it. Due to various delays associated mostly with that consulting project and the start of the No Fluff schedule in April, things happen in the spring and summer. We went to beta in the early summer, like June or July, I think, and therefore I got a lot of feedback, and that required a lot of extensive change too. I may talk about that at some point later. But the bottom line is I didn't really finish the book until pretty much the late fall, November again, which ironically was NaNoWriMo all over again. The delays from then to now, when I completed the book until current time, are basically that I wound up in a queue at the Pragmatic Programmers Publishing. They already had a series of books that they scheduled releases for, and I wound up at the end of the line, which is fine. At least I didn't have to do anything else. But you will not be surprised to hear that good old Venkat Subramaniam somehow managed to publish 2 books at the time it took me to write that one. His Pragmatic Answers book, in fact, it's easy to see over here. Let me go to PragProg, and I'll just search on his name, Subramaniam. And you see that what has he got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 books there. And at any rate, he wrote, this is his Pragmatic Answers book, Programming DSLs in Kotlin, which I read through, but I really need to look at again. At any rate, that's the Pragmatic Answers series blurb. And that came out in March. And then his second edition of his Functional Programming in Java book was released. It says February 2023, but I think the book's been out a little while. At any rate, that's already been out. And he's got a new one called Cruising Along with Java, which talks about the latest features from Java versions 9 through 19. That should be coming out anytime now. So I'd say he made 2 books. You could argue he made almost 3 in the time that I wrote my one little book, but okay. Any rate, yes, that's what all this says. This is a reminder that we learn on the No Fluff Just Stuff tour. Never compare yourself with Venkat Subramaniam on any scale whatsoever, except maybe height. Okay. Next section, Mockito version changes, or my personal Sword of Damocles. So one of the problems of writing a book on a technical topic is that versions change on the technical topic, and you have to somehow manage to keep ahead of those things. So during the review process, I contacted some people from the core Mockito team. I was hoping to get their feedback or their support, even though I know it's asking a lot. I was also wondering about the plans for upcoming releases so that I wouldn't be caught unaware. I didn't want my book to come out only to have them release a major update immediately afterwards and therefore make my brand new book look like it's out of date on the wrong book. I remember this, sometimes it could be quite dramatic. I remember years ago, this was late 90s, early 2000s, a Java changed versions. The enterprise edition of Java went to, I think it was 1.2, and they introduced a 2 in the number. So they went from Java 1.1, and instead of going to Java 1.2, they went Java 2 Standard Edition version 1.2. And everybody who had just written a book that said Java 1.2, suddenly their book looked out of date if you were not aware of the naming change and thought, oh man, that'd be awful. So at any rate, I wanted to know what was going to happen with the Mockito framework. So I consider that, a new release acting as my own personal Sword of Damocles, this thing hanging over my head that I was just waiting for it to come plunging down. At any rate, Mockito is one of those open source projects that doesn't have some official corporate backer or sponsor. So changes happen when the core team members find time to do it. That can be erratic. You never know when they're going to find time. And even during the beta, I found out that they were going to do a Mockito 5, and it was, quote, imminent, but I didn't know what imminent meant. There is a discussion board. If you look at the Mockito website, they say the documentation's in java.io, but they also have a mailing list. But if you look at that, that's a Google group link, actually. If I go out there, you'll see it. And the fact that it's a Google group gives you an idea how old this is. And notice how rare the posts are on this thing. I mean, here's a post from December 16th, and here's the previous one, is 2 of them in September. And then August, there's like 3 in August and 2 in July. I mean, this thing is really low volume. So this is obviously not where the main developers congregate, when they make plans and everything. So it's very low activity. I managed to get one of the core team members to give my book some feedback. He's thanked in the acknowledgments. I'll mention him there. And during the process, I asked him about the schedule. He confirmed that the release of version 5 was imminent, as I mentioned, but that could mean anything. But it wasn't going to be a big change. And that's another thing that makes Mockito a little different from a lot of other open source projects. Normally, when you change a major version number, like when they went from Mockito 1 to Mockito 2, that's a big deal. A lot of tests had to be rewritten. There were major changes to the API. But in Mockito, when they went from version 2 to version 3, the only real change is that users were required to upgrade to Java 1.8, to Java 8. That was the minimum that JDK supported anymore. And if you were already using Java 8, that was like, okay, whatever. It didn't change the API in any significant way. And then again, going from Mockito version 3 dot whatever to Mockito version 4 dot whatever, the only major change is they removed most of the deprecated classes and methods. So that meant if your code already used Java 8 and you already avoided deprecation warnings by avoiding classes and methods that were deprecated, then you didn't really have to change anything in going from Mockito 2 to 3 to 4. And the implication I was getting from that person on the team was that Mockito 5 wasn't really going to change anything yet again. But still, I wanted to make sure. All I had to do was make sure my code ran correctly in the new version. Well, as it turned out, Saturday, first of all, my book is scheduled to be released on the 25th of this month. Saturday, January 14th, I was checking my social media feed in the morning. I wanted to say Twitter, but I think this one was Mastodon. And only to find out that Mockito had finally released version 5 right before my book came out, but not that much before. And here are the lists of changes, just to give you a summary. First of all, they moved the minimum version of Java up to 11, which, okay, that's an interesting decision. Secondly, this thing called the inline mock maker, which I was already using, is now bundled in as part of the core, so you don't have to add it as a separate dependency. You only need the inline mock maker when you're trying to mock static methods or final methods or classes, which I demonstrate in the book. And now I could just use the core dependency for Mockito that way and don't need the inline mock maker as a separate or a different dependency. They did add a method to argument matchers called type, and really it looks like the only thing that was all about was handling mocking methods that took a variable number of arguments and you wanted to distinguish between one argument and many. And that's a real edge case, so that didn't really come up for me. Now, I wrote a Medium post about this that'll come out, and all I did is I went to my GitHub repository. Here is my GitHub. Well, this isn't the repository. This is the repository opened in IntelliJ. And you can see I've upgraded the version of Mockito to 5.0.0. And my bundle is the core now and the JUnit extension. So I could use JUnit 5 with Mockito. And that was the only change I made, and reran all the tests. And you could actually see if I run a clean test again, that everything should pass without any problems at all. I didn't need to change anything, which is good news. I mean, I did push these changes to the GitHub repository, but it all looks fine. Everything passes all the way through. I didn't have to update anything. So, yay, that's good. There's a few words in the introduction of my book that was anticipating this. I didn't know about that types method, or the type method, singular. But I did mention I thought it was going to go to Java 11, and I thought I'd heard that they were going to bundle the inline mock maker into the core now. And it's all good, and I hopefully will be fine with that. Okay, so much for Mockito. Next section, wandering through the Uncanny Valley. In the last few newsletters, I've talked about a couple of these new AI-based tools for developers and others. I've used ChatGPT a few times, like many people have, sometimes called mansplaining as a service because it gives official sounding answers that it sounds very sure about and sound good even when they're wrong, And the other one I use a lot is GitHub Copilot, your so-called AI pair programmer, which embeds inside your development environment and suggests code as you're typing along. And last week, I used some words to the effect that those were the primary AI tools in the marketplace. And I knew something was off about that statement as soon as I said it. And it was after I'd already released the newsletter and everything, I realized I forgot about the text to image generation tools. Tools like DALL-E 2, which looks like this. It's an AI system to create realistic images and art from descriptions in natural language. Or one that's gotten a lot of press lately is so-called Midjourney. And I don't know about their website's a little weird here, but they do have, if you look at the gallery or a community showcase, you can see lots of images. And if you mouse over, it will show you the text that was used to generate that image inside of this. Sometimes it's really simple, like this one just says Venice Epic Golden Light. And the change to Midjourney version 4 apparently really improved the quality of the image generation. The problem is I didn't want to pay for any of these things. I mean, I don't really have a use case here. It's just experimenting. So the one I want to play with is the one called Stable Diffusion. Now, that's not quite the right link. I mean, it's basically going to the documentation, which is part of Stability AI. But the nice thing about this is that it's open source. So you can just download the project and install it. It does require Python and some other dependencies as well. And I think I looked at it once and went, that looks complicated. So I didn't really do much before. But, and again, it isn't quite as user-friendly as the others, but at least I didn't have to worry about getting charged for experimenting. But I watched this video on the Nebula website, nebula.tv, by a site called Analog Dreams, and this video described a brand new user interface for Stable Diffusion called Invoke AI. And Invoke AI is at a GitHub repository. It's right in here, you can see. And if you scroll down, they discuss that this is a toolkit for Stable Diffusion. And there's installation links, and it winds up looking like this when you run it. And you type your description up in the corner and it comes up with some, images, what have you. And you got to go through a fair number of hoops. That video I watched was specifically for Windows, and I have a Mac, but I mean, if I can't figure that out, I've got to give it up, right? So I managed to get it to work on the Mac. So I decided to play along, and I've got one of those Macs with the Apple Silicon, the M1 Max chip, which I really like. This is one of the few times, by the way, when I heard the fan running, when I was using the image generation tool. At any rate, still got lots of room, so I figured I could handle all that. It took me a little while to get it up and running, but I gotta say my results have not been great. They've been pretty disappointing. Now, there is an art to coming up with the right prompts for these things, and apparently I have not mastered it. Of course, I was as much interested in trying to be funny or clever as actually getting something productive. So it could very well be me, but I haven't been wild about the results yet. Plus, if you wind up with any actual people, you often you run into what they call the Uncanny Valley. That's a link to the Wikipedia page, where images look close enough to be human to be creepy. Be like, no, that's not good. And this is a picture from the Wikipedia page where they talk about the Uncanny Valley. So the more familiar something looks or less familiar, and then this is the axis of human likenesses. So way down in industrial robots, they don't look like humans at all, so they don't really trigger anything. But and then they have one for the solid line is for still images, and the dashed one is for moving. So up here with humanoid robots, they start to look more and more human, and then eventually they look wrong. Even though they're close, they're almost too close and wrong. Whereas, they've got down here like a zombie or whatever. And for the still ones, they mentioned a corpse. It's like, oh, lovely. But a stuffed animal, that kind of cracked me up. I mean, I don't generally think of stuffed animals in this context at all. But the concept is of something that it gets past your filter of resembling something human, but it's off. And it just throws you off. And it's very easy to wind up in the Uncanny Valley with these AI image generation tools. So here I started off, or I used this for something that didn't have any humans in it at all. I put in my prompt here in the caption, 4 dogs playing poker in a dimly lit room wearing green hats, eyeing each other suspiciously, sitting at a round table with a pile of chips in the middle. And some of that got through and some of it didn't. I was expecting one of those little, visors that card players wear. And again, the dogs kind of look like dogs if you don't look too closely. If you really look at it, it starts to look a little weird again. But okay, I guess it looks like dogs playing poker. That's not too bad. Any rate, here was a total disaster. I put in as my prompt, the Beatles playing a concert during the assassination of Julius Caesar on a cloudy day in March 44 BC, or BCE. I tried both. Yeah, it didn't work at all. And where it really fails is the faces. I mean, those faces look deformed. Even the guitar looks really off. And the only acknowledgement of Julius Caesar is you get a little bit that might possibly resemble Roman architecture, I guess. But that's one where you just go, no, 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 no. Maybe a world of, no comma, a world of, and yikes, forget it. I tried this kind of silliness. I wrote an Android, which I don't see the Android in there at all, selling cryptocurrency to a baby panda in a petting zoo during a solar eclipse. And the only thing that came out of that was the panda and something about feeding it, I guess. But I don't get it. I mean, and then believe me, that's the best of them. I got some really weird looking ones that I just kind of deleted. It didn't work at all. Looks like most of that prompt got ignored, but maybe that's optimistic. This wasn't too bad. I'd been watching a video about the amazing atmosphere and possible underground seas, oceans on Saturn's moon Titan, and that the low gravity and dense atmosphere means you basically, with some fixed wings, you could kind of almost fly on Titan yourself with a running start. You could soar through the air. So I said an astronaut soaring through the Titan atmosphere using fixed wings and low gravity. You could see, first of all, the images are always better if there's no faces in them. This, I guess, is supposed to be an American flag, but it's backwards and it's wrong. But all right. And the astronaut is soaring through the atmosphere. I can't tell if he's just falling or she's falling, whoever it is. I don't know. I mean, as images go for Stable Diffusion, I wasn't unhappy with it. It's just not really what I asked for. Nothing about those fixed wings or anything. Again, it's not really what I asked for, but you could see it's better to avoid faces. I could live with that one, though it's not really all that close to the prompt. It's a shame because there are entire websites showing off galleries of more successful experiments. So here's one of them. This is at, stablediffusion.fr/gallery. I don't know why I wound up with the French one, but I mean, it's not in French or whatever. And they say, oh, choose a theme. Like you see here, the fun theme has got a miniature Darth Vader on it or whatever. But if I go into, look at the seascape, I guess, then you could see that, these aren't bad, I guess. I'm not sure, they're not showing me the individual prompts, but if I go to prompts, then, here they try to give you an idea what a good prompt would look like to generate these things. So, I may spend a little time digging through some of that as well to see if I can get something that does a little bit better. I borrowed this prompt from one of the gallery sites just to see what it would generate on my machine. A gorgeous young Swiss girl sitting by a window with headphones on, wearing white bra with translucent shirt over, soft lips, beach blonde hair, octane render, Unreal Engine, so somebody's into gaming. Photograph, realistic skin texture, photorealistic, which I guess that sounds redundant to me. Hyperrealism, they said that again. Highly detailed 8mm portrait photography, award-winning hard rim lighting photography. All right. Anyway, that's what I got, which, okay, I guess I could see that, and it doesn't look bad. Doesn't look creepy, because don't really see the eyes there. The latest version of that Stable Diffusion one seems to have some face correction, although you have to turn that on. Obviously, I didn't get that on the Beatles one. So you could see there's a technique in composing these prompts. Since the program's running on my own machine, I'll probably continue to play around with it. I also know that these systems are improving generation by leaps and bounds. They say the difference between Midjourney 3 and Midjourney 4 is night and day, and we'll see if Stable Diffusion goes through a leap like that as well. My hope is that the free open source tool will continue to improve along with them, because I don't have any reason to pay for these, even ignoring all the ethical issues or the lawsuits based on training on existing photos that were never really designed for that involved. As an aside, I have to admit I can only play with this for brief periods of time, mostly because of that Uncanny Valley. I mean, I start generating things that have people in it, and it looks really weird. It's seriously disturbing, and even the ones that aren't disturbing look off, and therefore I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore. So, anyway, it was some experimenting. Okay, new section on other posts. Now, before I put the tweets in here or Mastodon posts, I have to mention the other big thing that happened over the weekend. I think it actually happened Friday, is without any warning or so far, days later, any acknowledgement, Twitter disabled access for all the major third-party apps. And I used one of those third-party apps. I used one called Phoenix for Android. It was this one right here, Phoenix 2 for Twitter, which is on my Android phone. I love this thing because it didn't have any ads in it, and it doesn't have any promoted tweets, or of course didn't have any polls either. But at any rate, I've been using it for years. I paid for it. I thought it was very good. And it always listed the tweets in chronological order. I didn't have to worry about any algorithmic nonsense. And then it just stopped working Friday morning. And they didn't even know why themselves. And then they found out that, yeah, Twitter did it on purpose. I put in a link here to the article at Daring Fireball, which talks about, internal Slack messages at Twitter show that cutting off third-party clients was actually intentional and that they'll say something about it. Now, there was an article in Stratechery this morning that mentioned it's probably a good business decision, but just because it's a good business decision, I mean, they carried it out in the worst way possible. There was no capability for the developers of those apps to say, hey, we're going to be gone next week, or we're shutting down or whatever. It's simply, you're done, and they're not even explaining why, and no communications whatsoever. It's downright cruel is what it is. And that fits Elon completely, doesn't it? At any rate, so I mentioned, yeah, that's Elon being an awful person yet again. Okay, this made the rounds on Twitter, this thing about Karma Chameleon from Culture Club, way back in the day, and there's a little video, and they're all dancing around to Karma Chameleon. It's like a flash mob kind of thing, and then leaving. And you may or may not like that, but what I thought was a riot were the comments. If you looked at the feedback underneath it, people were like, this is a commercial for Al Qaeda, or I would immediately chew down the cyanide capsule I keep in my mouth, or, why won't God blow up the sun? Do my prayers mean nothing to him? Or could they, not? And this is why we can't have nice things. I mean, I didn't think it was that bad, but I get it, and I thought it was funny. Okay, this was an interesting observation. For some reason, the image didn't come through. If I click on this, you'll see it. So this is at Twitter. You get the image as well. Looks like meat is back on the menu, boys. And the comment is, so orcs have seen menus? Does this mean there are restaurants in Mordor? And, of course, my comment here was, there are restaurants in Mordor, but you need a reservation first. One does not simply walk in to Mordor or to the restaurant. And where's my instant rim shot? There we go. So in case you don't get the meme here is on Know Your Meme, and you could say there's the one does not simply walk into Mordor. You get it. Anyway, okay. The next one was a sick burn. Again, supposed to be a bit of a pun. Apparently, there was some right-wing nutjob silliness about gas stoves last week, and somehow I was fortunate enough to miss it, and I didn't want to dig into it once I heard about it. I'm like, why? But this was clever, as that Senator Marsha Blackburn, so another right-wing senator, government that thinks it can control what stove you use is a government with too much power. And it's like, really? And George Takei, who is wonderful, replies, and yet here you are, controlling what women can do with a bun in the oven. And boy, does that need a rim shot right there, of course. So I thought that was funny. This one I liked also. Spelling is overrated. This was a cartoon by Wayno Vision. Right, GoComics.com, Wayno Vision. It says, lucky for us, the cartoonist is a lousy speller. And I had to stare at it for a minute and realize, oh, I get it. The two guys are stranded on a desert island instead of a desert island, right? I mean, okay, one more. There we go. My response, of course, is they were getting their just deserts as opposed to desserts. Somebody eventually is going to send me a comment saying I spelled that incorrectly, and of course, they're right. I just did it on purpose. So have a good week, everybody. This is the video version of that newsletter. I hope you will consider liking it, commenting, sharing, or especially subscribing. Last week, I taught my Getting Started with Spring and Spring Boot course. I didn't really talk about that this week, but I'll talk about it again soon. On the O'Reilly Learning platform, I wrote a couple more Medium posts for when my book comes out. This week, I have my deep dive into Spring as a part of an NFJS virtual workshop. And from Wednesday until the following Wednesday, my wife and I are headed to the Florida Panhandle, sharing a kind of a vacation house with about 4 other couples. We go on this retreat every few years. This is the first time since the pandemic that we've done this. And that will make me, for at least a week, a Florida man. So you never know what's going to come out of that. I do expect to get the newsletter out next week. Whether I get the video out on schedule or not, we'll have to see. But wish me luck. And again, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. Take care. Goodbye.